I was happy. I'm with my cousin today, the Record Club,
One step ahead of me.
It's probably not the first one.
No, probably.
I'd much rather take him than be in. Yeah, I hear you.
Hi, Mark. Hello. Happy Monday.
Oh, this is one for you. Oh, thank you. Just for you.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the City Council work session here on Monday, June 27th, 2022 at 5 p.m. We are going to have a call to order here, and I'll ask Mr. Grotheth to do a roll call for us since we are absent a clerk tonight.
Nisley? Here. Tryon?
Here.
Bowles?
Here.
Lucas?
Here.
Garrick?
Here.
Carmen?
Here.
Reeker? Woods?
Here.
Thank you. A current copy of the Open Meetings Act of Nebraska is posted on the wall at the back of the council chambers. Before we get started, I would like to just ask everyone to use your microphone correctly tonight by remembering to turn it on when you speak, and also sort of speak into it, particularly that one up there in front. Because what happens is, you notice when I do this, you can't hear me quite as well as when I'm talking like this. So when you're answering questions up there, people have a tendency to want to do this to answer the question, and then the people out there can't hear you as well. And yes, I'm having a little fun with this tonight, but it is true. So when our community goes back and watches this YouTube session, and we anticipate that probably a lot of people will, they can't hear what you're saying when you do this. And I tend to project my voice a little bit. Not all of us do that. So please remember, talk towards the microphone. Those of you that are taller than I am may have to adjust it a little bit. I'm looking at one of our guests here who easily has a foot on me. So we need to remember to please use the microphone correctly so the people understand the answers that you're giving to questions. Okay, our discussion tonight will be on the rec center. And I want to remind everybody that there will be no formal vote or action taken during this meeting. I repeat, no formal vote or action will be taken during this meeting. It is a work session only. And as is always our tradition in work sessions, you do not have to request the floor from me. You may simply ask your questions. Okay? Now, if you happen to talk over the top of each other, please, let somebody go first and then ask the follow-up question. That is true of the council. The folks that are in the audience, I will definitely give you an opportunity to ask questions, but please wait till you come forward and we recognize you before you ask your question. Okay? Now, we're going to start tonight with a fine presentation by Megan McGowan and Leland Poppy and various others, and I'll let them introduce themselves as they go through the presentation. You guys have the floor here till we go through your presentation, and then we'll start with questions after that. If anybody has a burning question in the middle of the presentation, wave or something, and I'm sure that they'll be happy to answer your question while they're talking. So. Megan, Leland, whoever's going first, you're on.
All right. Leland Poppy, 1202 Custer Court. I get the lead today. Megan put a lot of the information together, so thank you, Megan, for doing that. What we wanted to start with today is just a recap of kind of where we've been. We went over this before, so this is going to be a little bit abbreviated. But overall, the rec center was built in 1976. There's been no significant improvements since that time to the rec center. Cody Pool was built in 1951. There was an update in 1982. We've had some comprehensive public participation and input sessions throughout the years. It's really been kind of a 20-year process, but most recently, the last 7 years, seems like there's been a consistent effort by various committees that started with the Mayor's Wellness Committee that's looked at various issues, with one of those primarily being the rec center and improvements to that. Those task force have continued with the discussions. In 2019, we had a presentation to the City Council. At that point, the questions that were asked was, let's make some improvements to the rec center, but what should we build? What should be the management options, and specifically looking at if the YMCA is an option, and then how do we fund it? And that's what we're going to go over tonight. With that, and we just feel like right now is the time as we look to the growth for North Platte and opportunities and the current challenges we have with the rec center. We think this is the right time to move something forward. So what the North Platte Area Wellness and Recreation Alliance, the recommendations are to expand and renovate the existing rec center. Those costs are approximately $45 million. The second part of that is enhancing and vitalizing Cody Pool. There's been a committee that's looked at options in Cody Pool to improve that, and that approximate cost is $7 million. With that, we'd like to establish a maintenance reserve fund that would be available for ongoing improvements to the facility. Some of the challenges right now with the rec center is, as we have major improvements where it's under the city budget, we don't have those funds sit there to actually complete that project right away. So that would be the idea, is to have a maintenance reserve fund. We do have a foundation set up through Mid-Nebraska Community Foundation that would do that. Our goal would be to raise $5 to $10 million. That could be there for those opportunities. It would be major expansion type opportunities or replacement. We're also looking at replacing the skate park with the facility design. The existing skate park to the south of the rec center would be removed. So this fund calls for $500,000 in relocation for the skate park. There's been a committee that's been working on that for years. And so what this would add to what they've already raised, they approximately have $170,000 right now with their fund at Mid-Nebraska Community Foundation. We've researched the YMCA option. 3 years ago when we were talking about that, it seemed like that YMCA option had a dead end. We had visited with McCook, Gothenburg, and Kearney, or McCook, Holdridge, and Kearney. Right now, Holdridge sponsors both Gothenburg and Lexington, and those three options didn't seem like they were going to work out. And over the last 18 months, we've had discussions with the Scots Bluff YMCA, and we have representation here tonight to answer some of those questions. But looking at that as a management agreement moving forward. The funding portion of that is to look at increasing the sales tax to the amount of 0.5%, which would allow for construction and funding of the rec center and those items we talked about up above. We'd also look to local fundraising campaigns, including grants, sponsorships, and individual gifts on the facility. We have talked to various foundations that have supported specifically the hospital ER project in the past. They're interested in supporting some sort of project for wellness, and so those discussions are ongoing, and that would be also a focus that we'd look at both for state funding and also various foundation fundings to help raise the funds that we need for this project. The community Envision aspect, that's Megan's going to go over that, and so Megan's portion.
Thank you. I'm Megan McGowan, and I'm here on behalf of the Recreation Alliance to talk a little bit about community vision. So again, I just want to point out that this is not my vision, it's not Leland's vision, it is not the vision of the Alliance. It really is a community vision. So we've had a lot of public participation. Leland alluded to this earlier. We did that Green Play study several years ago where they asked community-wide. We had focus groups, public hearings, public meetings, online surveys, hard copy surveys, a lot of different ways of getting the viewpoints and vision of the public. So we've put all of that together and are just bringing that here as kind of, we're the method of bringing that forward, but it certainly isn't just my vision or Leland's vision. Some of the things that came out in that community vision, the things that people wanted, these are the elements that we are pushing forward to be in the concept of this new recreation center, new expanded recreation center. This is in order of want, in order of the desires of the people, that they wanted to see a walking track, an indoor walking track, a leisure pool, expanded exercise space and workout or weight rooms, a lap pool that's regulation size that the high school kids could have competition swim meets at and also practice, a community space indoor classroom, drop-off center for children, and an athletic space which was specified as artificial turf. So these were the things that we had given to the designer to say, could you put these in our existing recreation center if we expanded and remodeled it? And so some of the concepts that you've seen, some of the concepts we have here on these boards tonight, and that video that we showed you a few weeks ago, that's where that came from, these community desires. And what is feasible? Like I said, we handed this off to experts. We didn't put all of this in and say, this is what we want to do, and Leland and I think we can do it. We called in the experts. The city was a part of that. They called in Barker, Rinker, CCAT, that mechanical and structural engineering firm, to look specifically at the current recreation center building and say, is the building structurally viable? Could it be reused and repurposed as a better and bigger recreation center? Sports Facility Advisory was a firm that we hired that specialized in recreation amenities, looking at what can your community support, what already is in your community, how can we complement what's existing, what's the right size of facility. So that's one of the things that they put together. And then the TSP, the design firm, and Sean Urban is here tonight that can answer some of the design questions, looked at all of these things, and could we put them in the existing building? What would it look like? So he was helpful in showing us the vision of what it could look like if we should use that existing building. We get this question a lot, why use the existing building versus a new build? So again, all of those firms came forward. BRS said, hey, the building's in good shape. It is structurally sound. There are some elements, that the dome, for instance, and some roof issues, some egress things, so some minor things that are not in great condition, but ultimately that building could be reused and repurposed for this space. SFA said the combination rec center plus sports complex, our community could support that. We could support additional gym space. We could host tournaments that were larger here, including swim meets and things of that nature. And then again, TSP showed us the design of what it could look like if we used our existing building. So the recommendation from the Alliance is that we do that, use the existing building. It's in a great location that's already accessible for kids. It's in a safe location. It just is the best use of resources at this time. So that's where the recommendation came from. And just a little bit, like I said, Sean put together these drawings to show us that that our existing space could look like this, which I think is really inspiring. We do have a video. I showed that here a few weeks ago, but at the end, we can show that again if you want to see it, or if there's some members of the audience that want to see it. The YMCA operating agreement, this is where I'm going to turn it over to Conrad and Trinity. They are from the YMCA in Scots Bluff. I'll let them do further introductions of themselves, but to talk a little bit about what does this YMCA operations agreement, what could that look like for North Platte? Why the YMCA? Those types of questions. So, you guys want to come up? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to turn around because I want to talk to both sides, but I'll try really hard not to. My name is Conrad Bostrom. I am the CEO of the Scots Bluff Family Y. I'm from Gearing, Nebraska. I have been there for 5 years. With me is our senior program director, my right-hand colleague, Trinity Bergner. She has also been at the Y just a couple months less than I have, but about 5 years. And we've come together as a working team, not only in our own association, but in collaborations with our local hospital, with our public school, and our city. And so we just really appreciate this opportunity to come talk to you about the mission, vision, and values of the YMCA and what it could look like in North Platte. First question you might have is, why can't we do our own YMCA? Your community's not big enough and to be chartered. technically, Scottsbluff, Nebraska isn't big enough to be chartered. But it was long enough ago, and we shouldn't exist. And my gosh, we exist and we're successful, and we've really turned our way around in the last 5 years, so we can do it. But you would need a community of 35,000 to be considered for a YMCA charter. So on the technical side, we've claimed this trade territory, which doesn't mean anything except unless another Y objects that's closer, we can establish a branch here in this trade territory. So we've done that preliminary. What we envision this to look like is it would be run as a full-service branch of the Scottsbluff Family YMCA with a local advisory board making local decisions. The structure and the governance of this branch would be under the bylaws and articles of the Scottsbluff Family Y. It has to happen that way. That's a YMCA requirement. But local operations, local control, local programs, fundraising, whatever you want to say, is going to be very specific and to North Platte and controlled by North Platte, if it happens. And why are we interested and somebody else wasn't? Because I love challenges. This is personal. I love opportunities. The glass is almost always half full with me. I think this is a tremendous opportunity. I kind of like Megan and Leland. I know that sounds a little bizarre, but I'm getting to know them quite well. I have a lot of faith in our future leadership. I'm 4.5 years away from permanent mountain climbing, but this is the future. She's an outstanding individual, highest caliber employee I've ever had in a 40-year working career, and I'm confident that she would do very well being responsible ultimately for this location. Specifics about an operating agreement. There's a lot of business models. There can be a lot that can be particular. Without giving you something that my board of directors has not approved yet, I would entertain any questions when we get to the question part that looks at it. But we're very excited about this opportunity. The only thing I don't like about it is road construction on the drive down. That's the only thing I don't like. But the restaurant selection in town is excellent. We're very happy with that. And Trinity, is there anything I missed in that? Operations and program specific, and particularly aquatics, that's Trinity's expertise. She'll definitely be there. Corporate structure, administration, fundraising, that's my expertise. Good?
As Conrad said, he'd have more questions at the end if something comes up. But here's their picture. And then these were some of the comments there that he discussed. So the last part of that also, there's a chart in here just on overall some of the questions related to what the monthly rates would be. And as Conrad said, it would be local control, so rates would be set by the advisory board based on the budget and operating expenses of the facility. So the question is, how are we going to fund it? We discussed that a little bit, but the funding recommendations is to have that fundraising goal of up to $10 million in grants, sponsorship, individual gifts, and then also look at public-private partnership. We have an interlocal agreement. The school system has discussed that, not formally approved it yet, but they would provide some funds for the operation of the pool. Their swim team under this design would be able to have swim meets. It'd be a pool that would be accessible for their swim meets. They use it for practice, so for that they would provide an annual contribution to the pool or to the YMCA. Also then the 0.5% sales tax that would be incorporated as part of the fundraising effort. With the 0.5% sales tax that's estimated right now, that would generate $3.2 million based on the 2021 numbers. Those numbers have been increasing every year, but we've looked just at the 3 million, 3.2 million moving forward. The voters would have the opportunity to vote on that with the approval of a supermajority from the council. So that would be in the November election with the voters getting to vote on that. That would allow for us to capture also dollars for individuals passing through, or as Megan lives in Brady, she comes here, drives on our roads for free, doesn't pay anything, so we'd capture a little bit of the sales tax to get her to pay for part of the rec center also. So that is estimated at about 25% of the total dollars that are generated. And that's a conservative number, we feel, but 25% of that amount would be paid by those passing through our community. Also, the bond does sunset at the time when the bond is paid off, the sales tax sunsets. So it's not like we vote for a 20-year bond, get it all paid for, and then there's slush fund coming back once that bond is paid back. Could be 10 years, could be 20 years, depending on what that sales tax number looks like in the future, but it would be paid off in full. Megan also provided a copy. She did some research. She was always looking for research to go buy things, so she's been traveling the state, buying items. James, her husband's not too happy, but she keeps doing that. So other cities are doing the same sales tax. If you go to Lincoln, you pay for that when you stay in Lincoln at restaurants, hotels, same in Kearney. So it's just a tax that's been added on throughout the states and allowed by the legislature. So our next steps would be a resolution that would be brought to the City Council for approval to place the resolution on the ballot in November. We'd start the capital campaign right away. As we'd mentioned, we've had some of the foundations that have come through, looked at the rec center. We've had that discussion, so we kind of have that lined up, and different targeted foundations that have supported other wellness facilities across the state. And we've got a good group of individuals that would be interested in supporting that. So we would submit the special issue to the county. That has to be done in September on the language on what's exactly going to be on the ballot, and then November would be the general election when it would be voted on by the people. We did go through, you have a list of frequently asked questions that's on there, but we did pull out just a few of the questions. Yeah. So that is a little small.
You didn't bring binoculars for everyone?
Yeah. Megan's got younger eyes than I do. But, so the first one, do we know that a renovation expansion of the existing building is less expensive than building new? And so that, Megan addressed part of that, but we did review those options, and again, just looking at the location and utilizing existing facility, felt like that was the best option that was there. Does the additional sales tax require a public vote? We addressed that, so it would be voted on by the people in the general election. That has to be at a major election, either a primary or general election when this is voted on. And what additional funding avenues are being explored, and we discussed that. We would hope to get some additional foundation support and individual support. We could look at sponsorship as options for that facility as we move forward. I guess at that point, we can open it up for questions and bring anybody up that you'd like. Pete.
Leila and I talk to you all the time. Conrad, I have a few questions of your operations up at Scots Bluff or Trinity.
If it gets
Feel
really
free
tough,
to-
Trinity will come
Feel
up.
free to pipe in. That's a completely new concept for us here in North Platte. So I was just wondering how the operations of the YMCA works up in Scots Bluff, what your hours of operation are. And I'm learning that a portion of the facility could be used 24 hours a day for key fob. But then I know it's local control with your umbrella, but how are you employing the service personnel and the operators and managers at your YMCA? Are they employed under the YMCA? I know it's a lot of questions, but just kind of give me an overall
You writing these
structure
down? Yeah.
and overall structure and organizational
We'll
chart
give
of your
you,
operation.
our YMCA is just under 2 million in volume sales. When we came on board 5 years ago, we were about a $400,000, $450,000 negative cash flow at our YMCA, and we were very fortunate we didn't have debt. And we just went to work getting things fixed, kind of redoing our membership model. We brought it around right now where we run positive cash flow. We do cash fund accounting. We don't, we keep depreciation separate, amortization separate. You understand that. We work from a zero-sum gain budget, just like the city. We have to win, and we have hit it. Even in the COVID year with the extra funds we got, PPP, those kinds of things, we were able to meet or exceed budget expectations. We run our facility long weekdays, 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. We have a portion of our main facility that is 24/7, and once we establish that, it's never been closed. And that's approximately 15,000 square feet, which is workout equipment, and we can portion off our gyms and our pool and our locker rooms so that they're not 24 access. We anticipate that could be something that could be done here too. We have about 12 full-time employees, not about, we have exactly 12 full-time employees, 88 total employees. Our vision, if something would happen in North Platte, other than leadership and some management, they'd all be local employees, employed by the YMCA, obviously. And we would work from a cost recovery type cash projection here. So each month we'd account for expenses and revenues. And our only stipulation from our board of directors is we can't lose money. You understand that, but we're not here to make money either. So we have a much smaller but a similar scale agreement with Regional West Hospital and our branch there. It's just, we're just guaranteed to not lose money. They cover, and that's worked out. We're in almost 5 years with that agreement too. Well, what didn't I get?
Perfect, thank you. But under your agreement, so does the city of Scottsbluff own the building?
They do not.
They do not.
Yeah,
You guys
we-
own the
yeah,
building?
However, we have an LB 357 up on our ballot, which will build an aquatic center.
Okay.
And that would be managed by the Y, owned by the city. So we have a very similar circumstance coming up. Across the country, this type of collaboration is not unusual. In fact, it's very common because resources are limited wherever you go. And our whole objective, whether it's in Scottsbluff, whether it's in North Platte, is to somehow get 1 + 1 to be just a little bit more than 2. And that's really what we're trying to achieve here, and I think we can do it.
So, and in this agreement, the city would own the building, be responsible for the maintenance, almost like a triple net lease. Or, no, we would be responsible for the maintenance of it. You guys would handle the operations.
Right.
The advisory board would handle the operations of the facility. So that's where they're concerned.
That's where governance would come from.
That's exactly right.
We just have to play by the rules that are established by our bylaws and by our articles, which will be easily done. And we need to have North Platte representation on that board of directors. So we would definitely do that. And we would have a lesser representation on this advisory board. Majority would be North Platte. Just makes sense.
Yep.
The business model for this comes from my former life, which I was a ag cooperative CEO for 24 years. And we did this with convenience stores to great success. There were other people who are much better at it than we are. And we let them run our stores. And we produced a very similar, we own the assets, they ran the operations.
And the beautiful thing about this, the hybrid of the public-private partnership, where all the onus isn't on the government or on the people, it's a nice hybrid there, like a co-op.
It's essentially the same thing because we were nonprofit as well in the co-op system, so I get it.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you, Conrad.
Welcome.
You might not be done yet,
well,
though.
well,
Yeah.
I've got some questions.
Trinity might be up next.
That'd be fine. I would like for you guys to speak about maybe some of the curriculum offerings that you have, programs, things that maybe we don't have today, or the things that you guys focus on in terms of things just outside of coming in and using the facility.
So let me start by saying we don't know exactly what you guys have here, what exists. And again, it would have to be, it would have to be something that works for North Platte. I can tell you what we have in Scottsbluff. We have a very, very successful childcare preschool system. We have a very successful summer day camp program. So, and that means we provide some sort of childcare all year long. We also have a cooperation with Gearing Public Schools just across the river from us. We actually provide their after-school program for them. They came to us 4 years ago and asked us to, provide that service that was much needed. and we have, and that's been a very successful program for us. We also have multiple youth sports and adult sports. Very successful flag football program. That's probably one of our biggest programs. You know, we work well with the other groups in town as we would here. We definitely don't want to come in and, you know, take programs away from other groups. Scottsbluff has multiple travel teams. You know, they have other adult leagues like softball through the city of Scottsbluff. That's stuff that we have never, you know, we've never ventured into that part. We do what we do best, and that is the youth programming. Very basic. We have a really good structure for our youth programming. So it's very basic as far as skills. Again, we don't know what you guys have here. We don't know what you offer, you know, everything as far as youth and adult. But it would have to be something that we could come in and complement, or, you know, if it's a strong program, again, if it's a private entity, if it's a travel team or something, you know, with that, that's not something that we would come in and look to change or want to change at all.
For an example, you brought up traveling teams. Would it be common for YMCA to work with them on gym time and that type of thing, or how does that normally work?
We don't currently, just because we find in Scottsbluff that we don't have enough gym space, honestly. But, you know, that's something, if there is enough gym space here, again, it just depends on the market. But I think that's definitely something that we would entertain. If there is enough gym space and it's needed, then absolutely, that's what we would be here for.
Okay, I have one, and I don't care who answers. I don't know if it's from Scottsbluff or what you might be proposing for North Platte, but the people I've spoken to are very concerned about North Platte getting into a situation where they're having to pay a lot of tax money out to keep the, you know, as we've talked about it. Iron Eagle comes to mind to a lot of people, and I'll have to kind of chuckle because I read on here where if it doesn't pass the first time, we're going to run it through again, and I think that happened with Iron Eagle. So with fundraising, I'm interested in this fundraising. How does that work?
So as far as the fundraising, so it'd be multifaceted. So there's foundations out there. So the hospital would support it. I'll step up and, you know, tell Megan that she's going to support it from the hospital. But that would be, you'd have the hospital, you'd have the group that funded the hospital expansion. Also, we hope UP, big employers in town, would help support that. A portion of that, some of those foundations want that money to be spent on the facility, which we would do that, but then we'd also like to have, a part of that would be an endowment type, quasi-endowment is what we'd hope. So there would be the foundation board, and they could decide when that money is spent. So it wouldn't be for ongoing operation needs, but it would be there for major improvements or something that needs to be fixed, or if we can improve it down the road. But that funds would be long-term funds that would be there. Then on the operations side, I guess when you look at, would we turn this into a golf course type deal, there's a couple things that, first of all, there's no other private enterprise that's going to offer aquatics. And if you look at the income source, income expense from running a aquatic center, and Conrad would agree with that, we've talked about that, it just doesn't make money to have a pool for summertime. So that's a service the city provides, and it likely would continue to provide some support to continue that for the citizens, because there's nobody else that's going to step in and look at that. But operationally, right now, when the rec center was built, the goal was to have it affordable for all. So that means right now the budget, if whatever the expenses are, the revenue should be 50% of that, and then the balance is supported by the city. So the way the structure would work in this situation with the YMCA, there'd be a market rate, but then there's also scholarships that are offered. So if somebody can't afford it, if they don't have the income to pay the normal rate, then there's a scholarship. And in the case of Scotts Bluff, Conrad can correct me if I'm wrong, but he would look at the individually, look at the income of the individual that's applied, not keeping any names, just looking at the number and saying, yeah, they qualify for a 75% normal rate. So that scholarship is going just to those that need it. It doesn't, right now I'm getting subsidized. I pay $20. You know, under normal I may pay $40, but right now I've got the subsidy because that's the way the structure is set. But this would be individually targeted. So we'd hope when you do that, that your revenue would be a little bit higher overall so you could support that and it doesn't continue to be a drain. What the Scotts Bluff Y, part of their annual sustaining membership, and most YMCA's would have an annual fund that would help support part of that scholarship, and that needs to be determined. But overall, also with that fundraising, the sales tax, it's not going towards any operational expenses. So if you ended up having continued drain, like Conrad said before, that they had years where they lost money, you would hope you had some reserve for that, but then you have to adjust your, run it like a business, basically. So you can't just continue to move forward and expect the city to fund it ongoing. So
do you anticipate any, I know you mentioned corporate donations or sponsorships or whatever, but what about private philanthropy? Have you solicited, talked to, thought about contest or renaming the rec center or all those ideas?
yeah,
all the above?
we'd take any of those ideas. For example, the Lexington YMCA, there was a $2 million donation made by Orthman Manufacturing. So if you had somebody that came in and wanted to have naming opportunities, that would certainly be an option. The other thing with the YMCA, if you do have endowments or estates that would like to promote wellness for our community, they'd be more apt to donate to a YMCA than they would the city. So if you have, that would be one thing we would visit with attorneys and others, that if people would like to donate and continue to improve wellness for the city of North Platte, I think that's a worthwhile cause. And you'd have a lot better opportunity to get that than you would just having the city. Right now, the city or the YMCA in Scotts Bluff, your endowment fund, well, let's say before the market.
Good 2 months ago.
Okay. So that they have 4 to 5 million?
Yeah, it's 4.5 right now.
Okay, so that's a long time. They've been in operation, but they've had cases where people have donated for estate gifts that have built up that fund, and that would be continued to be part of what the foundation would do that's set up to promote the wellness program and recreation center in North Platte.
I guess overall, this is a wish list for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I do mention Plan B. So have you thought about, the reason I'm asking this is because I know that the public service building, we're going to have to do something with that, and that's going to be a major indebtedness to the city. So have you thought about, like, what could you do with 10 million rather than 50 million?
Yeah, we went through that process and tried to look at it. When you look at the sales tax percent, or the sales tax that could be generated, if 3 million over 15 years is kind of what this project would support. So we've had the questions, is it too big? We have other questions saying it's not big enough with the potential growth coming on. So with the sales tax revenue that would be generated, the bond should be paid back in 15 years. And then at that point, you've got a facility that's still in great shape, so then there's not any sales tax coming in then because the sales tax sunsets, but at least, you've got a good facility that's still in working order at that point.
So you think in 15 years with the 0.5% sales tax, that would include the interest on the bond and everything?
It's 15 to 20 years, but it all depends on what the interest rate would be, what the sales tax growth would be. So there's not a set number. The key is that at least the bond goes away, or the sales tax goes away when the bond's repaid. So it's not lingering to where we get in a situation that you just continue to tax the people.
And that would be used just to rebuild it.
Yep.
No operating costs.
Right, yeah,
Thank you.
you bet. Do we want to get Sean up and give kind
Yeah,
of an
I was-
overview?
I had a question for him, so.
Well, actually,
Okay,
I-
good,
I have
perfect.
one more thing to add to your comments. What we've been doing on whether it's aquatic centers or other centers, rather than just doing a title sponsor, oh. Thank you.
I don't want you to have to lay on that thing, Sean, so.
Thank you. What we've been doing on a lot of these rec centers and aquatic centers is we actually don't just get a title sponsor. We've been seeing there's a lot of demand for, I'd like to name the birthday party room, and I want to have that be our family name. And I think the last aquatic center we just did, I think we had a total of 10 donors that named different portions of the facility. And that ends up being a very popular thing, and people are willing to do that when they can have a name connected to it and just show that it's really the local community that is making it happen as much as it is taxpayers. So hopefully that
Thank you.
helps to kind of,
Yes, I was hoping
add
that
a little
that
bit.
was a consideration.
yep, absolutely. What question did you have for me?
Do you think the 45 million is a reasonable number still today in the current environment of construction?
It is. We updated that after all the craziness happened. And I don't know how much you've been watching kind of markets, but lumber's starting to get a little more reasonable again. I think we're anticipating things are going to kind of find a somewhat of a happy medium. It's never going to go back to what it was before everything went way up. Construction almost never does that. But in this case, we'll see some mediating happening over the next year to year and a half, and then we'll start to see some big inflation again, unless something else happens and inflation can kick in any time. But we've seen the big bulk of it for right now, and I think we're all anticipating that you go out another couple of years and we'll just start seeing it start to ramp up again pretty quickly, just because that's the way the construction industry tends to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, right now, that is a reasonable number for a spring start of construction. As far as what we can predict, a little bit tough to predict what things are going to be like 9 months from now, because nobody's been able to do that, but we try to add enough kind of educated guesses to put it in there to where we feel like, yes, that is doable with the right management. And there's things that built into the plan that SFA recommended that we can kind of trim this back a little bit and slice that back just slightly to try and bring it into a number if it looks like things are ramping up too quickly, and try and compensate for that too. So I think it's a workable number.
Thank you. And also, how do you anticipate, I know this is a really hard question to ask, but how do you anticipate the interruption to our current rec center while the remodel's going on? Do you think you'd be able to still maintain a portion of the facility and then move our construction around as things progress?
Yeah, I think courts and locker rooms, things like that will be available throughout because your existing gym is set in such a place that it should be very little disruption for that. You can probably arrange exercise classes, things like that, to continue throughout. Pools are going to be offline while they're rebuilding the pools because it's going into the same spot.
It is?
We looked at the potential to put it in a different place and repurpose the pool area from a plan standpoint, just because of the size of the facility compared to the park it sits in. That wasn't especially efficient to do it that way. It was actually better to rebuild right where it's at.
Okay, excellent.
So part of it will, part of it won't.
Okay, yeah, which is atypical. Your vision here, Todd Van Kampen did a great job of, and I wrote down what's going in the new rec center. I know this is flexible, but are we kind of thinking the 5 basketball courts / volleyball courts, the 4 pickleball / tennis courts, and the walking track is awesome, expanded cardio space, weight room, indoor pool, all that. Do you think, I'm assuming a rock climbing wall in there too, because I saw that in your conceptual video. Anything else that we're not seeing? Is that kind of where we're thinking of going with this for amenities?
We highlighted a lot of what is in that plan within the video. There's a few other things. There's some exercise areas that are additional spaces right now. There's kind of one primary space. In this concept, there would be a few of them, so there's a little more flexibility in the way classes are held for things like yoga, some other things. Those weren't necessarily featured. There's potential for a field area in here as well. I think that's in part of the notes there. That wasn't highlighted in the video because, to be honest, that may be something that may be shrunk, it may be grown. Who knows what's going to happen with that? Ultimately, this was a concept based upon SFA's original recommendation for the community. Their recommendations are built upon a growing community that is increasing in population and trying to make it so that it's right-sized for where you'll be in the near future. And then from there, we can, as if this does get approved, we would have community meetings and start to talk about, okay, let's kind of just check our temperatures. Is everything in here that you really want to see, or is there something that this is what we'd really like to have there, and maybe we aren't as interested in this after all? You know, you mentioned pickleball, and that's hugely popular. But we've seen, you know, I remember the days when racquetball was hugely popular, and right now it's not as popular as it once was. So we try to create these spaces so they're actually very flexible. So as times change, hopefully you can change the facility with the times and keep it current and appropriate for what the community really wants. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
You're good? You bet. Oh, yeah.
Ask you one too. I know Donna made the comment of the project having kind of a wish list component to it, but from the centers I've visited in towns of our similar size range.
Hey, Ty.
Yeah.
Microphone.
Sorry about that.
Okay,
I was
start
trying
over.
to keep my paper shuffling from going into the microphone earlier. So I'll restate my question. Donna made the comment earlier about the project being kind of a wish list type project, but as I visited a number of other communities in our size range, the offering seems pretty consistent with what I've seen in other communities in that 25 to 40,000 resident range. But it also has a nice modern look, modern amenities in that. And so I'd like you to give us your opinion about the scope and size of this center for a community of our size and outlook. And I mean, is this a Cadillac? Is it a Chevy? Is it a, you know, I mean, give us a little color on how you see it out in the world.
Well, and I think compared to a lot of facilities in a town of 25,000, I have done maybe two that are of this kind of scope and caliber in a smaller community. But from what I have seen in both of those smaller communities tend to step up bigger than sometimes the bigger communities do, especially when it comes to half-cent sales tax, things like that. And so I've seen it work really well. And I think as far as kind of what grade it is, you know, it's hard to tell since these aren't final concepts. I think what I tried to design was something that had a modern presence and felt like it was up to date, but hopefully timeless to a certain degree, so it doesn't feel like, you know, looking 10 years down the road, boy, that's really looking dated now, everything's starting to fall apart. It was really designed with long-term, longevity type materials, things that'll really last a long time. We always design all of these kinds of facilities with a 50 to 60 year time frame in mind. Some of the pool systems don't last quite that long because some of the products that go into them will need to be rebuilt, but we kind of compensate for that and make sure that it's easy to do later on down the road for ongoing maintenance. But I'd say this is, it's probably not a Cadillac at the high end of a sports car, but it is probably a high-end Chevy to a low-end Cadillac, somewhere in that type of range. I think that's that's what's appropriate, especially for a small community. I think it's so important that the community feels like they're making a good, valid investment that's going to last a long time, that they can really depend on. So that's kind of the approach I took with some of the concepts. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
that makes sense to me, and it
Okay.
reiterates, I guess, what I thought, because it seems like this should pay off in 10 to 12 years if we got really lucky, likely 15-ish, maybe 20 if we didn't see a lot of sales tax growth. Now, I actually think the project will generate sales tax growth in the community as well, which we're not baking into the cake on this, but it just logically, if we can pay off a 50 or 60-year facility in 15 years, it doesn't seem like we're going too out of bounds on our means. And I think this half-cent sales tax has generally been issued by the legislature with this kind of a idea in mind for communities to be able to make a choice to do things like this. I guess I'm not sure who the right one to ask on this is, but what is that half-cent sales tax initiative designed to be used for, or what are the eligible uses for that type of tax?
See, and Gary thought he was going to get out of this meeting without having to talk. Mr. Pearson, would you grace us with your presence, please? Need to repeat the question?
State your name and address.
Okay. Gary Pearson, President, North Platte Area Chamber Development Corporation, 502 South Dewey. The infrastructure sales tax was negotiated through the legislative process, I'm going to say approximately 10 years ago. Cities had always been capped at 1.5 cent sales tax, and they were pretty flexible in what you could define it to do. And only had to be put on the ballot by a simple majority vote out of the city council to do that. Voters always had to initiate it. It cannot be voted in by city council. It has to be citizen driven. So infrastructure became a huge issue with cities and all the challenges you face with all the things you're responsible for and you have to provide to community. So it negotiated through the legislative process to be very specific. It has to be used for infrastructure. And within the law itself, it kind of defines several things that are infrastructure related, rec centers being one of those. It also had specifics on it, had to be tied to a specific sunset provision or tied to bonds. And when bonds get retired, the sales tax also goes away. You could always bring it back to do additional things like public services, building or whatever. And it also has to be voted on only at a general or primary election, unlike other sales tax initiatives, which could be a special election, whatever. And there are other provisions you have to go through to pass an ordinance after the voters vote on it to make sure you get it filed with the state and it goes into effect on a specific quarter. The state divides their fiscal year into quarters, so you want to make sure if this is voted in, you give the people the opportunity to vote on it, which is all that the council's being asked to do, is give the people a chance to decide for themselves. And if they do, then you need to be prepared to get your ordinance initiated quickly and get it in there so you're not forfeiting an entire quarter of revenue that doesn't get captured. So, but I was part of an effort to pass the very first infrastructure sales tax in the state of Nebraska when I was at Sydney. And we did it, we got 75% approval vote from the folks, and a good percentage of that did go to recreation facilities. It proved to be very popular, got a lot of things done. It's a great way to pay for things because everybody gets to pay a little bit. And it becomes the people's facility because they're the ones that voted it in. And so it works. I've seen it work in a number of different communities have now initiated it. And I think it's passed far greater than a percentage than communities that have rejected it. I haven't heard of very many of those. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Yurick.
This would probably be a Sean or a Leland question. About the pool being opened, I've had some community members have some questions about, are we gonna be left without a pool? I see in here it's a 2-year build time. With Cody Park, I'm assuming that would be done after the rec center is completed. You wouldn't do them simultaneously, I assume, right? Or have you?
That's
Feel free,
correct.
either one of you guys step up here.
Yeah, that would be correct. We'd try to coordinate that as best we could.
Gotcha. So how often or how long do you think the pool, the city of North Platte would be left without a pool? Because obviously with the 2-year build time, that's gonna be part of the process. Cody Park in the summertime, it will cover that, but there's gonna be some downtime. What do you think?
I'll bring Sean up for that one.
Oh,
Well, as far as rebuilding a pool within an existing building, that is probably going to be a 1.5 or so total process. Now, depending on how we end up with a final configuration of that, I put down just kind of a concept of how that could be done. We might be able to do that in such a way that maybe we do a part of the pool, rather than doing them both at the same time, we do one of the pools at one time and then get that open and then start doing the other one to take the old one offline. To a certain degree, that ends up adding some time to the schedule, and it also adds a little bit of cost to do that. So there's always kind of outweighing differences as you start to look at things, and so that'll be part of the general concept as a final design is developed to figure out, is it worth it to have one of these open all the time? Because here's the kind of premium we'll be paying to have that option still available. And so that'll all be weighed as we get ready to do a project.
could you take some consideration that we do have a pool in the summertime, so if we could maybe, I know construction in the wintertime's not the easiest thing in the world, but maybe try and time it so that we have as minimal of a downtime in our pool, so our
Right.
elderly constituents would appreciate that, so.
Sure,
Thank you. I got a financial question, kind of similar to what Donna was asking. Leland, why don't you come on up here? So, we're gonna have 5 to 10 million set aside for a foundation to help cover some of is it for maintenance costs, or is the city on the hook? 'Cause I know the city owns the building. Will that foundation cover those maintenance costs, or how does that structured?
The goal there would be, it would be long-term asset improvements. So right now, dehumidification system, for example, if that's $700,000, so those funds would be there if something happened down the road. So it wouldn't be necessarily maintenance ongoing, smaller items. And my thoughts are, and it hasn't totally been structured, but that foundation board would decide where those funds should be set with the actual, mission in place for that foundation, that it's long-term assets that it would be used for. Or you could have, down the road, you decide you wanted to expand the facility and, you needed a field turf or whatever it could be. I mean, those funds could be there for that, but the idea is more emergency funds and not necessarily ongoing maintenance.
Gotcha. So the day-to-day maintenance would be, the city would be in charge of that then?
It would be, between the YMCA and the city handling that.
And then if the facility, if the Y runs it at a loss on an operations level, would the city also be in charge of those losses?
That would be determined. Part of it's, right now with the city, with the Cody pool, for example, that's more of a loss, but we know the Scots Bluff YMCA won't cover it. So they do have the sustaining membership fund that's about $200,000 a year that they ongoing try to raise money for, so that would be part of it for those scholarships. So that might be part of it, and then just that operating entity, local management group would have to decide how best to handle, the income and revenue.
Gotcha.
And try
Thank
to
you.
manage it that way, yeah.
Leland, can I ask a follow-up on that? Sure. Where we have a business location over in Kearney, we see some of this, but it would be pretty normal for a YMCA to be having kind of ongoing fundraising to help support operations, right?
Yes.
Is that right? And I suppose that depends on how you're operating and what your needs are, but to Brad's question, I think a loss doesn't become automatically a city liability, right? I mean, they might ask for help,
Right.
but it's really be the responsibility of that board to figure it out, right? Which could mean a request for assistance, right?
Yeah, and you could have, I mean, you go through the COVID situation, you know, you get something like that, you're gonna have up and down years, so hopefully, you know, you're building some reserves there for that. But I believe as far as sustaining memberships, if you're making money, losing money, it's always kind of out there annually just as a support for the YMCA and the youth activities that are there in the scholarship fund. So that's, you know, it's not like, oh, this year we're not doing as well, so now we're gonna have a big campaign. It's the idea is it's sustaining that everybody has that commitment that the mission that is going on at that facility is what they want to support. So it's, you know, $100 from a lot of people to just continue that mission.
Trinity? I don't know if you've been in our rec center, and again, a difficult question, because I know you have a sliding scale based on socioeconomic factors, but would you say a base rate at our rec center is middle of the road for your YMCA? I guess where I'm asking, are we anticipating the normal person in North Platte to pay more? And again, it might be worth more because we have a brand new facility in that, but how do you anticipate a monthly rate, a yearly rate versus our rec center today?
You know, from what we've seen as far as rates currently at the rec center, I think we're very even. I think you might see some different categories as far as membership, you know, more Y categories, but I think as far as rates and what you're charging now, it looks like overall, you know, some of them might go up a little, but we've also noticed that some of them might go down a little. It just depends on, you know, what category, but very, very similar to what we have currently.
Okay. So the citizens in North Platte wouldn't expect a huge change in what we're looking at right now, probably.
I honestly don't think that anybody is going to be shocked by a huge change in rates.
Thank you.
Hey, Megan, would you bring up that graph we did? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I
Small.
can see that.
So sorry, it's kind of small. What this is we average basically the YMCA's across the state that are west of York and the different categories, and you can see the towns listed below there. And the categories vary in quality slightly. I mean, the young adult is 18 to 23 in some cities, and it's 19 to 25 in others. And so we sort of stuck them together. But if you look at the youth is, well, I can't even read that. 23, oh, thank you. Okay, thank you. So let me get this one right here. Okay. Youth, which is clear to the left, the average across the state of those locations is $23.63. And the current, and this is just the base rate. This no discounts or anything. It's just the base rate. North Platte's right now is 26 in that category. Young adult is 34.06 is the average. At 33 is North Platte. Single adult is $41.52 is the average. Single adult North Platte is 39. And one of the categories I thought was particularly interesting that several of the Ys offer, although not all of them, is the one adult with youth. So that's a single parent. And I can't read Megan's handwriting, but it's 53.68, and I think it's 88 in North Platte or something like that. So, and then there's several others on that graph, but that's just kind of to give you a general idea of the average Y charges. And I believe the general approach here is that you're averaging 8 or 9 different cities together there. Ours are going to fall right in that same category, give or take a little bit, based on what's going on.
Perfect. Yeah, I saw that slide go by, but I had no idea what it said, so thank you.
Yes.
Conrad, do you have something there? Yeah, clarify a little bit. typically for Wise, you know, we're in west of York made a lot of sense. Typically, McCook and Scotts Bluff have been the lower two Wise in the area. The thing you want to clarify, Pete, is that it won't be very much different, like Trinity says, but the application might be different. Where Leland probably isn't going to get 50% off for being old, which I'm older than Leland, so I can say that. But if there was a family in town that was financially in need, they might pay a significant amount less than they do at the center, and the difference is made up. The rule of thumb for YMCA's in annual fundraising, that's what you ongoing, like Leland brought up, that's for annual use for membership scholarships is 10% of your budget. Scotts Bluff is one of the rare Ys that meets that or exceeds that. I came from a similar size Y in Minnesota where it was 4%, 5%, very affluent community, but wasn't a giving community. They gave to capital projects, but they didn't give to the annual campaign. Scotts Bluff's been very successful in their annual campaign.
And to tie into that, I was going to ask a question, but it's probably, again, really difficult. When I said public-private partnership, I think this is going to put more onus on the business members, which is a good place for it to be perfectly honest with you, because you're taking care of your employees and all that. So would you say it's out of your yearly operating budget, would you say it's maybe 20% subsidy by business owners, the business community in the city, and an 80% the individual citizen? What do you think?
Pretty close. We calculated up to 23.4.
Okay.
So yeah, we're
So-
not splitting hairs.
And that's kind of what I thought it would
Yeah,
be.
that's very close.
And what it's doing is kind of taking the onus off the city to subsidize to the tune of $600,000-$700,000 a year, and it's kind of putting it on the business community to do that, because they're getting the advantage of it, and the community's getting the advantage of it also.
And again, it goes back to that 1 + 1's got to be a little bit better than 2. And I anticipate fully, because we've proven this, that if there was a subsidy that had to come in from the city, and there will be to a certain extent, it'll be less than what it is now. I really do anticipate, if it's run correctly.
Right.
It will be.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I think this question might be for you and Lane, or whoever can answer it, but so the committee has spent extensive years building this recommendation. It's a very thorough recommendation, and then the voters would ultimately make this decision. The city council's in the middle of that process because we need to not approve the measure, but approve it going to the ballot. What actually are we voting on at the city council level? In other words, is it just the tax? Is it the tax plus a budget range? Is it including the contract with YMCA? I mean, what actually would we be entertaining to vote to go to the ballot?
For the sake of clarity, Megan, would you go back to your next step slide, please? Thank you. In answer to your question regarding the resolution, the city council will consider the resolution either in the last meeting in July or possibly the first meeting in August. The language of the resolution is such that it's what would actually be on the ballot, or at least the major part of it would be on the ballot. And what will be contained in the resolution is really the motion, or excuse me, the acceptance of the city council to place that ballot question on the ballot. And so really, the resolution is doing nothing but approving that language would go forth and be on the ballot. And then the voters in November, of course, would decide whether that measure passes or not. City council is really just moving the resolution onto the ballot.
Okay.
Okay. Won't worry about assuming that resolution is completed, and it has to be done by a supermajority of the council. So 70% of the council, 6 of 8, have to approve it, or it doesn't go on to the ballot.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. And then in September, assuming the resolution passes, then in September, We would submit that to the county to be put on the general election ballot. And then, of course, that would be voted on in the general election in November.
And so I'm working off the assumption that the resolution will primarily be funding mechanism based, and but with a plan to have a contract with the YMCA. But let's say we got 4 years down the road and we didn't think the YMCA concept was working like we wanted it to, and a future council wanted to change that, that may not be bound back to that ballot resolution at that point in time?
The YMCA won't be bound to the ballot resolution.
Okay.
The sales tax is what's being considered in the ballot resolution, and the sales tax for the specific purpose of building/remodeling a new rec center.
Okay.
The contract with the YMCA to potentially manage the rec center would be considered by the council at a future date. There isn't much point in negotiating that unless we actually have a chance of having a new rec center, so that's why we haven't seen anything. But we've talked conceptually a couple times about what the approach would be, and you've heard answers consistent with those conversations here tonight. So just to be clear, the ballot resolution would be for the sales tax for the purpose of building or / remodeling the rec center. It'll be worded more eloquently than that, but that's
Okay.
the gist of it. So.
Oh, that makes sense. And I'll just comment that I like the idea of exploring the YMCA concept in conjunction with this, because from my view, the fundraising power that a YMCA brings, in addition, I know you guys have looked at a number of things with your recommendation, but I think the ongoing fundraising power is very significant. People don't like to donate to cities quite as much as they do when you have a YMCA director twisting your arm. You know, I mean, I've seen the other side of that, but and maybe we should, but that's been my history, is to see that YMCA's have strong fundraising power.
Any other questions from the council at this point? Okay, those of you in the audience, if anyone has a question that they would like answered, you're welcome to approach and ask your question. Just a reminder, this is not a comment period. This is ask your question, and we will do the best to answer it. We may not be able to answer your question tonight, depending on what it is, but we will record it and do our best to get an answer in the future. Anybody who has a question, welcome to come up. Going once, going twice. Council members, anyone have any other questions? If not, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Lisa, I saw you make a comment. Oh, that's nice of you. Okay. Okay, meeting is adjourned as of 6:11. Thank you for coming, everyone. We appreciate your time tonight.
Well, thanks for being here.
Always good to see you.
Yes. Sorry, thank you for